Just a few weeks ago, a man in an SUV ran down a crowd of people participating in a yearly Christmas parade. The speculated, shocking motives behind the crime are still being debated as disturbing online posts come to light. Our Christmas villain here is a man named Daryl E. Brooks, a 38-year-old man from Milwaukee. Those who have interviewed him recently have described him as a man who seems to be soft-spoken, calm, and even lucid. The comment on lucidity will seem more relevant in a bit. Brooks' mother has said that her son suffered from quite a storm of mental illness ever since he was a little kid. All throughout his childhood, he was treated with a strict regimen of medication and therapy. But once he embarked into adulthood, he lost the insurance that had been paying for all of that medication and therapy. After that, he spiraled out into a cycle of jail and crime-ridden freedom. Brooks was somewhat known online as an amateur rapper by the stage name Math Boy Fly. He frequently acknowledged his frequent run-ins with the police, even going so far as writing in the description of some of his music that, after multiple legal battles, he started turning the life he lived in the streets into music. He wasn't exactly lying though, he had a fat list of legal battles under his belt. There are almost too many charges against him. I mean, it would take up a huge chunk of this video, but just for the sake of comprehension, let's go over them briefly. 1999, aggravated battery, carrying a concealed weapon. 2000, carrying a concealed weapon, loitering, resisting or obstructing an officer, possession of cocaine. 2002, resisting or obstructing an officer, driving a vehicle without consent, possessing THC. 2003, resisting or obstructing an officer. 2005, resisting or obstructing an officer, receiving stolen property, possession of a controlled substance. 2009, paternity warrant issued, resisting or obstructing an officer. 2010, strangulation and suffocation, domestic abuse battery, criminal damage to property. 2011, probation violation, failure to appear in court, paternity warrant, possession of THC, possession with intent to sell, bail jumping. 2012, bail jumping, failure to appear in court, resisting an officer, possession of THC. 2020, possession of a firearm as a felon, endangering safety, reckless use of a firearm, possession of meth. 2021, paternity warrant served, domestic battery, bail jumping, endangering safety, disorderly conduct, resisting arrest. The man was charged for bail jumping after multiple incidents, firing off guns during arguments, obtaining stolen guns, getting caught with funny, multicolored pills that just happened to test positive for methamphetamines, and more. While a lot of rappers really play up their crimes for show, he didn't. Now let's bring the story up to November of 2021, leading to a popular yearly Christmas parade in Maukesha, Wisconsin. Heading up to this parade, Brooks was out making some mischief yet again. He was accused of both DV and of using his vehicle as a weapon. A 31-year-old woman that he had made a child with accused him of coming to her motel, yelling at her, taking her phone, and speeding off. She walked over towards a gas station when Brooks pulled up to her, telling her to get into the car. She refused, which didn't go over too well. Brooks responded by punching her in the face. Then, while she staggered away, he ran over her with the vehicle. She was left with blood all over her face, a swollen lip, and tire tracks all over her left leg. Police were called and went over to Brooks's home, where they caught him getting out of a red Ford Escape. He ignored the police when they ordered him to stop and ran into his home instead. He was arrested soon anyway. Brooks was soon booked and sent to Milwaukee County Jail on November 3rd. Unfortunately, just a couple of weeks later, he was released on November 16th. All he had to do was pay a $1,000 bail and he was ready to go. It was now 5 days before the parade. John Chisholm would later go on to say that the dollar amount on the bail was, quote, inappropriately low in the light of the nature of his recent charges and the pending charges against Mr. Brooks, which included many of his more recent charges on the previous list. This was also egregious that it would later require an official internal review. And now the fateful day of the Christmas parade. Just a couple of hours before the parade, Brooks was out, again, up to his usual shenanigans. That Sunday, Brooks was in Waukesha, fleeing the scene of an altercation in which he brandished a knife. Once police were called and arrived on the scene, Brooks hopped into a red SUV and bolted from the scene, a bit of foreshadowing of what was to come. Police weren't able to respond to this scene for very long. A little while after 4:30 p.m., the parade in Maukesha was already in progress. People were enjoying themselves with marching, bands, floats, dancing, and singing all over. Hundreds of people were participating in the parade, and thousands more were spectating. A Waukesha police detective, Tom Casey, was conducting traffic control for the parade. A while into the parade, he started hearing a horn honking. Looking over, he saw a crowd of people parting as they jumped away from a quickly oncoming, you guessed it, red Ford Escape. At this point, the Escape wasn't exactly moving dangerously fast yet. It was still slow enough that Casey was able to yell at the driver and pound on the hood several times, ordering him to stop the car and get the hell out of the parade route. A witness recorded as he saw the SUV barrel straight through several police barricades blocking off the parade route. Another officer ended up experiencing something very similar just a moment later, as the SUV was now going about 25 miles per hour. It was around 4:38 p.m. when the officer put himself in front of the car, held up his hand, and yelled for it to stop a multitude of times. But again, the driver did not listen. He kept on going. There was little that the on-foot officer could do as the vehicle continued to plunge its way in through the parade route. At first, the officer just thought that the driver was a moron who ended up in the parade by mistake and was trying to find his way out. However, this was not the case. He soon discovered when the driver peeled out into full speed and abruptly swerved straight into the crowd. A video captured by a parade viewer shows a young girl dancing in the street when the vehicle sped past her at a dangerous speed, only missing her by a few feet at the most. Further down, the city was live streaming the parade when, suddenly, the marching band in the middle of playing Jingle Bells was quickly interrupted by a red SUV barreling straight into their path from behind. Spectators yelled out in terror. The crowd screamed and fled backwards as the car struck down a number of members of the marching band. It hit at least 2 people initially and continued to roll over them. The car kept going down the road into People's Park, where it kept going and didn't stop. At this point, a police officer opened fire in a desperate attempt to stop the driver. The car continued regardless, moving in a zigzag pattern in order to avoid vehicles, but not people. It clearly was aiming for the people, and it hit many. A total of 6 people were killed in the incident, ages ranging from 8 to 81 years old. 4 of the 5 people who were killed were part of a dance group called the Milwaukee Dancing Grannies. The victims were Virginia Sorensen, 79, Leanna Owen, 71, Tamara Durand, 52, Jane Coolidge, 52, and Wilhelm Hospital, age 81, along with an 8-year-old boy. Many more were injured. First responders and even residents of the town quickly rushed over to the scene in order to try to keep the victims alive and stable as possible. Some civilians even rushed the victims to the hospital in their own personal vehicles. By that night, a local hospital in Waukesha County was treating 13 victims from the incident. 3 were listed as being in critical condition, 4 were in serious condition, and 6 were seen as being in fair condition. Froedtert Hospital in Milwaukee, which was the only Level 1 trauma center in all of southeast Wisconsin, was treating an unspecified number of victims from the massacre themselves. Given that that level of trauma center usually only cares for critically ill patients, it's easy to see the level of severity of what they were dealing with. At least 18 of the hospitalized victims were children from the age of 3 to 16. Many of them were hospitalized at Children's Wisconsin. Luckily, many of them were only there for injuries ranging from facial lacerations to broken bones or bruises. Some, however, did have serious head injuries. These kids included 3 sets of siblings who ended up getting injured together. Brooks had managed to escape the scene during the chaos, but not for long. He showed up at a nearby house, banging on the door and desperately asking the owner of the home to call an Uber for him.
Hey, I called an Uber, and I'm supposed to be waiting for it over here, but I don't know when it's coming. Can you call it for me, please? My ID. My ID. Huh? Whoa. Whoa. What?
26, 500 block Elizabeth.
Police showed up, arresting him soon after. He was then taken into custody. Flags were flown at half-mast the next day all over Wisconsin and the U.S. as a whole as the people of Maukesha continued to mourn what had happened to their community. Many people were left dead and many more were traumatized for life, mourning loved ones. Class was canceled all throughout the city, as well for the kids. Mourners were on site attending a candlelight vigil to mourn the victims in Cutler Park, despite it only being a day after the incident. Hundreds of people were there to mourn victims and to support the survivors. Brooks was the only suspect. He had clearly acted alone. He faced 5 accounts of intentional first-degree homicide along with a myriad of other additional cases in relation to the incident. As he languished away in jail, his mugshot and his story were blasted all over televisions all throughout the United States and in some other countries as well. His lengthy criminal record and his, in itself, criminally low bail were the main talking points, aside from the massacre. At this point, officers hadn't really come up with much of a motive for the incident. Something that came to be of note was that all of the victims who died in the incident were white. But when looking at the demographics for the city, Hispanic and non-Hispanic white people make up roughly 89% of the population, so the odds are pretty high that you'd encounter much more white people when attacking at random. So, does this mean anything? Well, it's hard to say on its own. It's safe to imagine that it would be fairly hard to pick out specific targets when driving through a crowd, but once people started going through his tweets and Facebook posts, people began to wonder if this was all racially motivated after all. Immediately when hearing the lyrics, you're hit with such gems as "fuck the pigs" and "fuck Donald Trump." Not really too out of the ordinary at this point. I mean, it's rap. Hating cops is pretty commonplace. Hating Donald Trump isn't really anything out of the ordinary either, but things get darker and more weird. When pressing onto his social media, you're met with various posts that are a lot more alarming. Brooks shared posts that outright called for violence against white people. Seemingly contradictory, he also shared posts stating that a certain reviled German leader was right for killing Jews. This is a notably common belief of a group called the Black Hebrew Israelites, a cult that believes that the true Israelites of the Bible were ethnically black. A less common but still prevalent belief of the group is that the Jews were killed because that certain leader knew that the true Hebrews were not them but an ethnically black group, and that America has moved the fake white Jews into the state of Israel to perpetuate this lie. This has been thoroughly debunked across the board, but that often isn't a factor when it comes to beliefs such as these. Many of his tweets, Facebook posts, and memes have since been deleted, but a lot of them remain online in screenshots in which we are to see his demented, uninformed, kinda dumb thought process. Brooks made his initial court appearance the very next day, on Tuesday. He cried all throughout the proceedings, stooped forward with his head almost completely in his lap. His court-appointed attorney patted him on the back in an attempt to soothe him, likely in order to get him to quiet down. "I just feel like I'm being made out to be a monster, demonized and dehumanized," he would go on to say. I wonder why, what the fuck? Brooks is now being held on a $5 million bond, a substantial increase from his previous pathetic bond. The State Public Defender's Office continues to refuse comment on the situation. As this case is very recent and still very relevant, little details here and there are bound to emerge or even change in the oncoming weeks. So stick with the channel and I'll give you periodic updates from time to time. And Merry Christmas. Thank you again for watching this video, and hopefully all of the Christmas videos this month. I had intended to wear a Christmas hat, but I don't know where it is. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like, it always helps. If you disliked it, it doesn't matter anymore. Be sure to subscribe if you like content like this. It's pretty much 90% of what I talk about, maybe more. And if you really want to support the channel even further, I do have a Patreon, which I link in the description below. And speaking of which, shout out to my top patrons: Jewel G, Wafrans, Callahan, Jules Latona, Arctic Cat, Alan Damiani, Adrian Lawley, Winnicott, Murray Joel Sanchez, David McLaughlin, Marsh, Buffa Zerk, Lonro, Jewel Mavchan, Lori Tayaba, Kim Peak, Lux Alpaca, Charity, Skooky Main, Foxlicity, Jackie, and Teresa Ferguson. As usual, you guys are not bad, but quite the opposite, pretty good. And Merry Christmas. Again, I just said that, but it's still true, 2 minutes later. Police showed up. Oh wow, they really did.